Well, earlier in the program, you saw me create my wet in wet underwash ready to paint this summer foliage. Now, just before I do that for you, there's one thing I just want to do, which is to paint in the road here. And all I'm gonna do with that is just apply a nice medium mix of burnt umber just to the road. And in the process, the most important thing here, I just want to make sure that I paint around my puddles. Okay, so I wanted to do that first. Oh, I've lost a puddle there. Not to worry. It's drying up. The day's going to be nice after all. All right, so this is just burnt umber, just to complete the base. Oh, I'll leave a few little highlights there. They can be turned into stones, little rocks on the road as well. Very often in watercolour, some of the things that we don't plan are the best bits. So whenever you get little accidental, just bits where you've missed with the brush, just leave them in, because you can turn them into rocks and they look natural and random, and that's great. Okay, so now the foliage. Here we go. This is the important bit. I've finished my wet and wet underwash. I'm now going to paint my foliage over the top of this. And you're probably wondering, well, what is the point in the underwash if I'm just going to paint over the top of it? Well, the idea is that if this all works correctly, is that the underwash will still be there and it'll still be contributing to the overall effect. Now, I'll show you what I mean. I'm just mixing up. I'm still working with the same two colours. In fact, there are only 4 colours throughout the whole of this painting. I'm using cadmium yellow and Prussian blue for my greens, and I'm using burnt umber and French ultramarine for my greys and my dark tones. So I won't be veering at all from that. So I've mixed up a nice rich green, cadmium yellow, Prussian blue. And now I'm going to paint in some foliage. So, it's a little bit dark. I should water it down a bit and add a little bit more cadmium yellow to it. We should be constantly remixing. You can't overmix. It's a constant process. Just keep fiddling with it and adding colour and changing it. And it can be yellow 1 minute, a bit more cadmium yellow, then a bit more green, a bit more blue. All right, so what am I doing here? I'm painting in the foliage. Thing about summer trees is when you look at them, there are just billions and billions of leaves, and the thing that we don't want to do is paint all of those billions of leaves. That would be ludicrous. There are a couple of technical terms about to wing their way towards you, so do pay attention here. Right, first of all, the thing that I'm doing here is I'm using quite large brush marks to suggest large areas of foliage. So each one of this represents lots and lots of leaves. The technical term is clumping, all right? Clumping, you heard it here. All right, clumping. So we're clumps of leaves together, lots of clumping there. And then around the edges, what you see me doing there, is I'm sort of just dropping individual brush marks on to suggest a few individual leaves. Dobbing, all right? Clumping and dobbing, right? 2 technical terms for you. I'm constantly playing around with the mix. Lots of clumps of leaves up near the top, a few little gaps here, a few individual dobs of leaves, so lots of clumps. And hopefully what you can see now is that the foliage is starting to develop. Now, there is another thing that I want to draw your attention to, and that's this. I'm putting brush marks on the paper, but just look at the spaces between the brush marks. They are as important, if not more important in some cases, than the brush marks themselves. So you've got these brush marks, you've got the spaces between the brush marks, the negative spaces, and that can represent, with a switch of perception, these sort of lighter tones can either represent leaves that are closer to us, so light leaves with dark tones, dark leaves behind them, or a gap between the dark leaves, if any of that makes sense to you. So lots of clumping, lots of daubing, and trying to keep it nice and loose here. A couple of things we have to be careful of when we're painting summery foliage is we have to be very careful not to create any repetitive patterns. It's a very easy trap to fall into. I know I do it myself. I see others do it. Easy trap to fall into. Try to avoid creating anything too repetitive. There we go. Lots of daubs down here, a few individual leaves, and I think that'll more or less do. I mean, you know, the amount of time you want to spend on your trees is entirely up to you. I've seen people spend a whole day or more just on creating a single tree. I quite like the idea of it being as loose as possible. I'm reasonably happy with that. As I say, just look at those gaps. Some gaps between the brush marks there. They could represent light leaves against a dark background. Now then, so at this point, I'm ready to start painting in some the tree trunk and the branches. For that, I'm going to mix some the burnt umber and the French ultramarine together. It's the same two colours I used for the grey, in fact, but I'm now going to mix it up a lot richer, a lot darker, really nice, thick, rich mix. And I'm going to paint the tree trunks in and the branches. I'll just pick a slightly smaller brush to do this. So let's start here. If I paint that tree trunk there. So this is the dark tone, burnt umber, French ultramarine, and just paint it up to the foliage, like so. And it's got to disappear into the greenery. And I'm just going to use the second brush there, with a damp brush, just to soften that off and give the impression of a bit of shape to the tree trunk. And now, I mean, I've got tree trunks all over the place and branches all over the place. They've got to disappear into the foliage and then reappear a little bit higher up. And there needs to be, you need to think about your, what's the word I'm looking for? Continuity here. If a branch disappears into the leaves and then reappears a little bit further out, we have to believe that it's part of the same branch. So we do the same thing here. If we darken it, in fact, just at the point where it disappears into the leaves, that adds extra depth to it. All right, so I don't want to spend too long over this. Just put a few branches in, and I'll just have that reappear up there. That's actually still damp. It would be better if that was left. Oh, actually, no, I quite like it being soft there. Sometimes you need to, just take a bit of time and allow things to dry off first if you want hard edges. Put a few branches in there, and I think that'll do. All right. The good news is you don't have to. Oops. You don't have to have a branch joining every single leaf, and not every leaf has to appear to be attached to a branch. Okay, so very, very quickly here, I would also use that dark tone, now that I've got it, just to paint in a few stone details, just in the wall there. Not too many, less is more. Just, keep it simple, just put a few lines in. It's better than painting every single stone. Oh yeah, keep it nice and loose. Just a couple of details in there. Be careful not to create faces in the wall. That'll do. Again, keep it loose, softening them off. And one final thing, a couple of things really, just to finish this painting off. One is it needs some shadows. guess what? It's the same two colours. It's French ultramarine and burnt umber. So we add burnt umber to the French ultramarine, but I want it to be more of a blue-grey mix than a neutral grey. There we go. And I would use that just to apply some shadows to the scene. A little bit more, not quite got enough there. I'll show you what I mean with this. We have this wall would be in shadow, so we'll apply some shadows have them casting across the path or across the road. Shadows explain away the three-dimensional shape of objects, so it's important for shadows to follow the contours of the ground. So when they meet the grass verge on the opposite side, look, they want to curve. And that way they help to accentuate and explain away the shape of the grass verge. And finally, there's a couple of a little thing I want to add here. I've got my puddles, which I haven't yet painted in, but I'm going to paint those in. This needs more shadows, but I'm just, that'll do. I think you get a rough idea of where I'm going with this. A few more shadows there. And just finally, just drop in some of that green for the puddles and a bit of the blue-grey in there, just to suggest water. Okay. And that is it. That's a summer scene. Just to recap then, if you're going to do summer foliage, start off, just try it. If you've never done it before, try producing yourself a nice loose wet in wet underwash and then paint your leaves over the top of it. Remember, clumping and daubing, and it keeps it nice and loose and hopefully natural looking too. Oh, one other minor thing, this needs to dry off, but just around the edges of your puddles, just wants a very tiny, just put a dark edge, and a dark tone there. Like that, it gives it a little bit of extra shape. So that's a summer scene. That's summer foliage done in 2 stages, a wet in wet underwash. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time.
Today I'm going to show you a very simple little tip that can solve a lot of problems that my students particularly come up with. Very often they'll buy a canvas, have it about the house, and when they come to use it, find something's been leaning against it or whatever, and there's a dint in the canvas. And you try to push it out, and it sticks out. Push it back, it goes in, it won't go flat. And they abandon the canvas because what can you do about it? Actually, the answer is very simple indeed. You need a brush, you need water, you take the canvas, and on the back, where the bump is there, just paint the water all over. Rub it well in because there will be some priming on this canvas which will resist the water to a certain extent, but just rub that in and take a few minutes for that to dry off. Then we'll see if it flattens out. So there we are, a few minutes to dry, and the canvas is as smooth and taut as you could wish. Very simple, one saved canvas.